So I'm happy to introduce to you this morning my good friend and teaching colleague, Dave Rockland. Dave is the executive director at UC Berkeley Haas of the Innovation, Creativity, and Design Practice. And Dave and I have been working together for 8 or 9 years now. So without further ado, please say hello to Dave Rockland.
Thanks, Clark. I actually have my own virtual espresso this morning, so I'm ready to go. Very excited to be talking to you. So aside from the innovation and creativity and design thinking work we do, part of what's in the practice is something called Foresight and Futures work. Clark and I actually lead an annual class that I'll talk about in a bit with MBA students on this. And Jeff and Clark thought it might be interesting to see if some of those tools and sort of looking through the lens of signals and drivers might reveal some interesting things that are happening as a result of this crisis. So I'm delighted to be talking to you all in the age of COVID. So I wanted to start out by pointing out on the first page here on the right, that picture of the green QR code. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's pretty interesting. In China, the two of the larger social networks, Tencent and Alipay, have basically partnered with the government, first regionally, I think it's now national, to track pretty much every Chinese citizen and whether or not they should be out in public. This could be because they have been sort of flagged as potentially or having the disease, or simply through their interactions that maybe that there's a risk they should be home quarantining. And while it's displayed here as a QR code you can show, for example, to go shopping or back to school, it's quite probable that as people move around with their phones, the government is keeping track of who should be on the movement, who shouldn't, and notifying those folks that they need to return home. So really interesting use of technology in a somewhat controversial way, but it's obviously very effective at the same time. So that really leads into sort of where we're going with this. I mentioned we do foresight work. It's basically trying to take a look at the future in light of what in Silicon Valley is commonly referred to as a time of exponential change. Some people refer to it as the fourth industrial revolution, so you can take your pick there. But the interesting thing about it is that the types of technologies out there in the world are moving really fast. In fact, much faster than I think any of us can really track or really understand in terms of their impact. And that's because we tend to think more linearly. I think this is definitely revealed with what's going on now with sort of some pushback on social distancing and staying at home, because sort of what's happening exponentially behind the scenes isn't seen yet. So it doesn't feel like there's all that much impact from the virus yet, but it is probably happening faster than we can really understand. So, one way we talk about it typically when we introduce it to either executives or in our classes with MBAs is to think about the difference between linear and exponential. So, with linear, linear is the equivalent of stacking 20 pages. You can imagine that. It's easy to think about how thick a stack of 20 pages of paper is. Not very thick, 2 millimeters. I mean, so thin, I don't even bother mentioning it in inches. But if you take exponential, rather than stacking, you would think about actually folding the paper. So the question is not how many times do you stack it, it's how many times you fold it, because it doubles each time you're folding it. And to double, basically to fold a piece of paper 20 times, it's not just 2 millimeters, it's actually 50 meters. So the difference is really drastic in a way that we don't understand. In fact, if you just folded it 4 more times after that, that piece of paper would be taller than the tallest building in the world, the Burj Khalifa. And that's really hard to sort of get our arms around. Even if you do sort of agree with this point, being willing to, to accept it in terms of personal or business strategy is something that we found that really needs to, it's really difficult for a lot of our students to get their arms around. So, really what we're trying to put on them is that change is coming whether you like it or not. And if it is coming, then you need to figure out how to sort of not just anticipate it, but also to think about how you might shape it. Because if change is coming, you want it to be positive rather than negative. So I was told that the format of these morning virtual espressos is a 4-point format. And I've actually done that. I've kept my, my thoughts to 4 different points. There's a little bit underneath there, so I may have jury-rig the system a bit, but the four things I'm going to talk about is the rapid acceleration of some key expected drivers. These are things that we think we're going to have an impact that seem to be having an impact faster. Some interesting signals that maybe some new things are emerging that are going to stay around after the virus is long gone. The third thing is this idea of the thing after the thing. So trying to think a couple steps ahead, more like a chess player than a checkers player in terms of where things are going. And the fourth is really about the power of optimism and how you can, sort of shape things in a positive way. So that's where we're heading. I wanted to start with the first one, which is the rapid acceleration of expected drivers of change. So where do these expected drivers come from? That's an interesting question. In our case, we do, Clark and I help lead an annual event and